I want to talk about Time's Up Now, which is largely an outgrowth of the Me Too movement, which focused mainly on sexual harassment and sexual harassment in the workplace specifically. You've kind of expanded a little bit more to focus on I guess, issues that are sort of related to that, but a little bit more broader in the sense of attacking diversity issues and I guess trying to make some of these companies a little bit more accountable.
Well, the reason we did that, and thank you for having me on, and happy Juneteenth to everyone. We were created out of the aftermath of the Harvey Weinstein articles and women coming together, realizing they weren't alone and how prevalent sexual harassment was in the workplace. And our first initiative was to create the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund to provide unprecedented amounts of legal and PR support to survivors of sexual harassment in the workplace coming forward. But, we didn't want to just deal with the aftermath, pick up the pieces afterwards. We wanted to keep sexual harassment from happening in the first place. I mean, that's the real goal. We want safe, fair, and dignified work for women and for men in the workplace. And to do that, the real issue is you've got to create better workplace culture. So that means not only workplace cultures that are addressing sexual harassment, but that are addressing things like diversity, inclusion, preventing microaggressions from happening, making sure we have fair pay and promotion, making sure we have things like equal pay. If you don't value your workers in their entire sense, then you are going to then victimize them and, make them victims of sexual harassment and other abuses in the workplace. So that's why we've really been working now on this broader mission of safe, fair, and dignified work for everyone.
And to that mission, Tina, you have the Time's Up Guide to Equity and Inclusion During Crisis. It's sort of a practical guide, how many a company and many a business leader right now is looking at their workforce, trying to understand how they can better serve their stakeholders, whether they be employees, their customers, and indeed their shareholders. Talk to us a little bit about the immediate practical uses, ways and means they can drive more inclusion, more diversity within their businesses.
No, absolutely. The guide was created actually by soliciting input from over 24 companies, diversity and inclusion experts in those companies. They represent about 700,000 employees in total across multiple industries. And we try to put the best learning into these practical guides. It's the first edition. We plan to keep iterating it. It started looking obviously at the pandemic and coming back, and some basic, simple safety things like if you're going to do social distancing in the workplace, think about when you're moving your desk 6 feet apart, who's going to move off the C-suite floor now? If you can only have 10 people in a meeting, who's getting excluded, who might otherwise, like a young, person coming in who is just learning the business, who might be able to just listen in to learn. We're going to lose those opportunities to bring people along in our workplaces. But it also applies in the current moment and what we've seen in the last 3 weeks in this really awakening and reckoning that's happening in our country around anti-racial efforts. And, it's things like recognizing that Black and brown employees both have experienced the pandemic differently, have experienced their own life histories as differently, are experiencing your workplace differently. So how can you address those? How can you lead with empathy as a leader of a business? How can you stop and listen to your employees, have the courage to listen to them, have the courage to speak out, even if you're not sure exactly what to say? Being silent isn't the thing to do right now. You need to say something. Don't be afraid of saying the wrong thing. If you say the wrong thing, apologize and come back, but make sure your employees know that you care about their entire life experience and you want them to succeed in your workplace.
Tina, it's interesting. I was reading an article from our Bloomberg opinion page called "As Work Has Moved Home, So Has Harassment," where it seems like it wasn't just in the actual workplace, but maybe through email and some of the chats and the messaging that we're doing as well. What is the best way to stop it as we've all moved home, but then the harassment has continued in many cases?
Well, this is really hard for managers, I have to say, because it is absolutely true. Harassment has continued. It happens on Zoom calls. It happens in emails and chats. It can actually increase because of the anonymity, right, of texting and doing emails. And it gets harder for managers because it's more invisible to you. So I think it's, number one, have a place where your employees feel safe reporting and making sure there are multiple places, not just to their manager, not just to HR. Maybe you have an anonymous tip line, maybe you have an outside counsel's office. Make sure you have multiple places that people can go, to feel safe, in reporting. Pay attention to what's happening. If someone's all of a sudden gotten a little more quiet in their engagement with you, check in with your employees constantly, especially now when the stresses of, not just harassment, but the stresses of what are happening at home. People dealing with no childcare and no school and no summer camps and trying to balance work. Check in with them often. And then, watch for what happens on Zoom calls. There's sort of microaggressions, the talking over people, the belittling people, can happen, in a Zoom environment as well.
Diversity, of course, Tina, has many guises, and we think about it not only in terms of your ethnicity, not only your gender, not only your age, but also your sexuality. And I think that we need to remember it's Pride Month too. Talk to us about this is a time where we're seeing the Supreme Court of America driving forward real change here in terms of acknowledging that diversity and making sure that there is a drive forward for equality. How is that something that Time's Up Now is looking at as well?
Well, absolutely. I mean, look, one of the things I'm so proud of about Time's Up is since our founding, we were intersectional in our approach, not, all women, right? Women of color, transgender, LGBTQ, but, the kinds of workplaces we are working for are ones that are inclusive of our disabled workers, are inclusive of older workers, of inclusive LGBTQIA plus workers. Absolutely. I mean, really, businesses are going to benefit when you can tap all of the talent in our country, when you can really allow people to make the most of their talents for you. When you do that in these economic times that are tough, and I realize that for business, but here's the secret. If you invest in your workers, they will invest in you. They will stay with you, so you don't have to retrain new people when times are tough. They will be more efficient. They will be more productive. I remember when we were in the White House, there was a small business roundtable we had with small business to say, how do you invest when you're a small business in your workers? And I'm always struck, one restaurant woman, she owned a restaurant in San Francisco, and she said, look, I can't afford not to. I haven't had to replace a restaurant worker in my restaurant in 11 years. I give them incredible benefits. And guess what? I don't have any employee theft. I don't have employee mishaps. I'm not getting OSHA violations filed because my employees are as invested in my business as I am, and it's making my business more resilient and more successful.
Tina, I mean, we've seen some progress, obviously, on a lot of these issues that you've just been talking about. And obviously, in this moment today, sparked potentially by the George Floyd killing 3 weeks ago, you've seen a lot of companies sort of embrace it, at least for now. Of course, that's also against the backdrop of an administration that for the last 3.5 years has at times been hostile to some of that progress. I'm wondering whether you think some of the changes that we're seeing at the corporate level and even, I guess, on an individual level are going to be lasting, and that is then going to trickle down into sort of a more broad-based, I guess, level of support amongst this nation.
Well, I hope so. I think what you're seeing is something a lot of us have been talking about for a while, that this millennial generation, which is now the large generation, in our workforce, in our buying, consuming public, cares about values, right? They care about the values of the companies that they're going to work for, the companies that they're buying goods and services from. You're seeing it now. They care about the values in their cities. And that's what we're seeing play out on the streets of America right now. And I think that's not going to go away. They're still going to be caring about that. And you see it in all the advertising companies are doing now. They want to capture those value-based consumers. That's going to drive companies to, in their own self-interest, dig deep and really live out their values. Because here's the other thing about this generation. They are looking for more than just words. They're looking for more than just a statement. So that means companies need to look internally. And I've been talking to a lot of company CEOs in the last several weeks on how can we do better? How can we really address anti-racism, anti-sexism in our workplaces? You've got to really address it with your own employees. Take a hard look at the composition of your leadership, the composition of your board, the composition of your hiring processes. How can you get better and be more inclusive? How can you do the training that you need to? And then really invest also in your communities. This is a time when companies can, contract with, bring your suppliers in, make sure they're diverse, right? Invest in some of the communities that have been hardest hit by the pandemic or by, some of the protests that have been happening out in the streets.